And when we think back to the early days of this outbreak, one thing we cannot overlook is that some of the initial in-depth reporting came from Chinese journalists. And they were, for a brief period of time, operating with what seemed to be a hiatus on the usual censorship that the Chinese government puts forward. In fact, as I'm looking at a monitor here, that censorship is continuing even as we're telling this story here in China. So it's something that they're used to. And when they had that window of opportunity to share the truth of the outbreak, they were doing so. But now many of those journalists and those who tried to preserve their reports are paying the price.
Nearly 5,000 miles from his home in China, Cheng Kun is now finding his way in a new life in exile. He fled to Paris after his younger brother was arrested last year, caught up in a crackdown on citizen journalists who reported on the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan. His brother, Cheng Mei, used his online project, Terminus 2049, to archive published stories about the virus, preserving them in case they were deleted by government censors.
At the beginning of the pandemic, the Chinese authorities, they covered up the real information about COVID. I think the information my brother collected and reposted will make the Chinese government feel ashamed.
In the early chaotic days of the outbreak, people used social media and live streaming to provide vital information to the public on the epidemic during a moment of national crisis. It also forced government officials to acknowledge the rapidly spreading threat. At the time here in Wuhan, there seemed to be a window of opportunity for journalists to do this kind of reporting. A lifting of China's usual censorship on media coverage that was seen as a positive sign of things to come. But soon that window slammed shut. Cheng Mei was arrested in April along with his friend and the website's co-founder, Cai Wei, accused of picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Zhang Zhen, a former lawyer, was sentenced to 4 years last month for the same crime after she live-streamed on-the-ground reports about the outbreak in Wuhan. She has staged a hunger strike to protest her detention. Her lawyer says she fears she may die in jail. Others who spoke out include another lawyer, Chen Chuxi, and Feng Bin, who uploaded a video of body bags at a Wuhan hospital. Both have disappeared into China's shadowy legal system. Police also reprimanded a Wuhan doctor, Dr. Li Wenliang, who had warned contacts on Chinese messaging app WeChat of the rapidly spreading SARS-like virus in his hospital. The doctor later died of the disease, leaving a pregnant wife. His bravery in speaking out made him a martyr in China and sparked national calls for freedom of speech. To reclaim the narrative and control the public message, China's propaganda department deployed more than 300 journalists to Wuhan in early February. The Chinese government has since denied targeting people for their reporting, saying, in China, no one gets punished or penalized simply because of making remarks. In Europe, Cheng Kun now becoming a whistleblower himself, protesting outside the World Health Organization and trying to tell the world what happened, despite the risks to his family.
China continues to taunt and test the new administration and the world, sending 15 fighter jets into Taiwanese airspace. The United States State Department calling the intimidation tactic concerning. This move coming as President Xi Jinping is threatening a, quote, new Cold War against any nation that would stand up to Communist China and issuing sanctions on those who have pushed back. Joining me right now is John RADCLIFFE. He is the former director of national intelligence. He has seen all of the intelligence, in fact, the most intelligence than anyone except for the sitting president. John RADCLIFFE, it is wonderful to see you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into China, I really want to get your take on what we just saw. One of the elements of this impeachment would mean removing any security that President Trump has. Is that right?
It would. I tell you, the whole exercise, though, Maria, is silly. President Trump has now been subjected to 2 impeachments. In neither one of them did he have due process. If you remember, in the first impeachment, he was deprived of lawyers for the first 71 of 76 days. You know, fundamental premise of our judicial system is due process. It's a fairness principle, and he was deprived of it. It was even worse this time. It was a 2-day proceeding. There was no investigation and no hearings. And so So you have that issue. And then secondly, it's just really a farce. There's no constitutional basis to move forward with a trial against a private citizen, which is what Donald Trump is. So there are so many ways that, as your prior guests pointed out, this is purely a political exercise at this point. It's certainly not helpful to the American people. It's disrespectful to the office of the presidency. I wish it wasn't happening.
Director, I want to get into China and whether or not you believe that the Biden administration will be softer on China. The Trump administration obviously was the toughest on China in terms of pushing back with sanctions, with prosecutions, with tariffs. Do you believe Joe Biden will pull back?
Well, Maria, you talked about some of the things that China did just this week. And I think it shows that China's testing the Obama administration. They, what I will say is, both publicly, what China is saying, and privately, what the intelligence showed us post-election is that China's happy that Joe Biden is president of the United States. It's what they wanted. And they sense weakness. And I don't mean that as an insult to President Biden, but China saw weakness from the Obama-Biden administration. And as you pointed out, it wasn't until the last 4 years of the Trump administration that someone stood up to a rising China with different policies and sanctions to hold them accountable in the world marketplace. But China wants to see if it's going to go back to business as usual as it was under the Obama-Biden administration. Will the Biden-Harris administration be the same? And so what you're seeing is they're testing to see whether or not the Biden administration will stand up to China. And what's important, Maria, is your point about the intelligence. No one has seen more intelligence in the last year than I have. And what the intelligence tells us is that China, and China alone, is our greatest national security threat. And it's where the Biden administration should be placing our greatest emphasis with regard to our national security policies and concerns. So the question is, will they? I watched a Real Haynes confirmation hearing, and there was some tough rhetoric on China, which was good. But rhetoric's got to translate into action, and we'll see if that happens. That hasn't been the history with Joe Biden. Let's hope that changes, because, Maria, this is not a political issue. This is about national security. And if the Biden administration fails, we all fail and suffer as a result of that by not taking China seriously.
And we know that China has stated its goals and ambitions very clearly. It wants to become the #1 superpower, overtaking the United States in that regard, not just economically, but militarily. Now, the Trump administration has pushed back on investors who helped to fund China's expansion by banning investment into Chinese companies that are tied to the military. I want you to listen to Jen Psaki, the press person for President Biden, and what she said about what they're doing right now in terms of delisted Chinese companies on the New York exchanges, as well as the potential for investment into these companies. Listen to this.
An approach of patience as it relates to our relationship with China.
So they're going to review it. John, what do you think?
Well, I can just tell you that what Jen Psaki said is entirely inconsistent with what the intelligence shows. The intelligence doesn't say we should have patience with respect to China. It says that we should act with respect to China. The policies that were based on that intelligence in the Trump administration should be followed. And, I increased our spending on China from an intelligence collection standpoint in the intelligence community budget by 20%. That ought to increase even more going forward. And what I'm hearing are signs that maybe we'll back off, that, we want better relations with China. And the path of appeasement is the road to nowhere when it comes to China. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. That's how they became our #1 adversary, and that's how they'll supplant us as a world superpower.